My name is Akhira Mahal, and I am a Black and Filipino Muslim American fiction writer from Paris, Kentucky. Despite being half Filipina, I've struggled a bit with that identity as an author. I grew up mostly with the Black side of my family in a small white town, if you're familiar with Paris, Kentucky, only half an hour down the road from the Carnegie Center. So Black literature has always been at the forefront of my concern, even up until recently in my first year of graduate school at the University of Kentucky's MFA program in creative writing. All my life, I was one of only a few Asians in my schools and had very few interactions with other Filipinos. Not saying we're not here, there's just a few of us. It was only in the summers when I went to California, Virginia, or the Philippines to visit my family that I was really able to connect with my Asian side. So, needless to say, connection to my culture has been pretty difficult. I eat the food, tinola, adobo, sinigang, but I don't speak the language, Tagalog nor Ilocano. So, there's a bit of a disconnect there. But in the past year, as I've injected more of my life into my fiction, I've found myself pining for Asian literature just as I had for Black literature. Although I still have a lot to catch up on within the Asian diasporic literary scene, I love what I've read by Amy Tan, Lon Samantha Chang, and Lexington local Danny Quintos. Shout out to my fellow Filipinas. As I continue to mature as both a writer and a reader, though, I know I'll come across even more Asian authors who will undoubtedly open my eyes and speak to my heart. I also have a unique experience as a biracial Asian, specifically as a Black biracial Asian, or Blasian, if you will. I feel like there aren't many of us, especially within the literary scene. I think it's this lack of representation that calls me to focus so heavily on writing about identity. The biracial experience is, in general, one of teetering. Oftentimes, we're on the fence of one identity or feel that we don't belong to either, truly. I am as proud to be Asian as I am proud to be Black, but I don't feel like I can be a spokesperson for my cultures. I can only speak about my own experience. A lot of my recent short stories have focused on the biracial experience or the experience of cultural mixing. I like to tackle racism, biases, stereotypes, microaggressions, along with how people combat or act complacent to those elements within their relationships. I think my experience as a Blasian provides a unique perspective not often written about. So I'm trying to bring awareness to it while also discovering more about myself and my cultures through the act of fictionalizing my life. Events like these, the AAPI Heritage Exhibition, are the perfect place for all of us Asians to bring together our shared and unique experiences for both ourselves and the community at large. I hope as these kinds of events continue and build up steam that the Asian diaspora will become more mainstream, leading to more inclusion and conversations across American society. With that being said, I'm going to read you all a little bit from one of my stories that was in my thesis. It's titled Jumpstart, and we're going to start a little ways away in the story, but I don't think you'll be lost. On a chilly fall day, 9 months after Ellen's diagnosis, a knock came to the front door. At first, she ignored it. Even after all the time that had passed, she still rarely got out of bed. Her trips were reserved for bathroom and snack breaks. Any visitors meant for her were met and turned away by Reed, but he was at work. The knocking continued. Ellen tried to tune it out by turning up her TV. The melody from Where Everybody Knows Your Name blared through the speakers, but it still wasn't enough to mask the constant rapping. What in the Sam Hill? Ellen scrambled out of bed. There was nothing and no one so important that they had to make all that racket. She threw on a robe on top of her nightgown and house slippers onto her feet. It'd take 2 seconds. She just peeked to see who it was and tell them to come back later when her husband was home to deal with any business. Can I help you? Through the crack of the door, 2 pairs of big brown eyes stared up at Ellen. She blinked, speechless. 2 toffee-colored little girls stood on her front porch. The taller of the two wore blue jeans, a red flannel, and a friendly smile. The smaller one wore a white turtleneck under overalls and had the cutest little pigtails tied up in white ribbons. She used the bigger one's extra foot of height to hide behind. Precious as they were, Ellen had never seen them before in her life. Why, hello, she stuttered out. A blonde woman suddenly popped out from the other side of the door frame. She tucked the two girls into her side. Her smile was so wide her eyes nearly disappeared. Hey, Ellen, she waved hard with her free hand. Long time no see, friend. Company had been the last thing on Ellen's mind. She thought the knocker would have been a postal worker or a salesperson, not one of her friends. The months of cold shoulder she gave them made a few of them wipe their hands clean of her, not that she could blame them. So the last person she expected to turn up was Susan. But Susan didn't seem to mind Ellen going AWOL. In fact, based on Susan's jabbering, it made for a better, juicier catch-up session, at least on her part. Ellen didn't dare to announce her infertility to the world, lest she be known as a broken woman, so she busied herself in the conversation with head nods and affirmation for every morsel Susan shared. Still, with as enthusiastic of a storyteller as Susan was, Ellen couldn't help but divide her attention to the two girls trying to entertain themselves in her den. They flicked through TV channels like they were in a trance. Hey, Susan, Ellen spoke lowly, cutting her friend off mid-sentence. Who are the girls? That's actually what I came here to talk to you about, Susan said. She had already been there for 2 hours chatting away, but Ellen couldn't complain now that she was getting information. Gary and Becca went on a mission trip to the orphanage in the Philippines. Oh, the pictures they sent. Susan wiped away an invisible tear. Anyways, you know how Becca's been crying to us about wanting a little sister for years, but ever since Gary had his little accident, we couldn't do it for her. Well, I had the bright idea to light two candles with one flame. We're adopting. Well, that's great, Susan, Ellen said, but I'm just a little puzzled. I get you, Susan nodded. At the particular orphanage Gary and Becca were volunteering at, none of those kids were siblings. But those two, she gestured to the girls, they're cousins, see? Attached at the hip. And that little one was the youngest there, not even 3 years old. It broke my heart thinking about those two getting split up, or the little one staying in that awful place. So I told Gary to bring them home. Suddenly, Susan leaned in close and got real quiet. She glanced over at the girls, but they were still caught on channel surfing. The thing is, Gary doesn't want to raise another tot. He says it's too much of a hassle. Ellen scrunched her face. Then why bring her here? Susan smiled big, her eyes warming up like honey. Because I thought of you. Me? Well, everyone else has their hands full with a house full of kids or sick parents or who knows what else. But I know you and Reed have a space and your head's on straight and you're not too far from us. We just need a little help until we can get something permanent figured out. A pang jabbed at Ellen's heart. Susan wanted her to become a temporary mother, to learn to love a little bundle of joy until her new home was ready for her. Hey, Ellen started slowly, the gears spinning in her head. The rust was flaking off faster than she could rationalize. What if we're that something permanent? Susan's eyes lit up. I was hoping you'd say that. Ellen blinked in surprise, but her heart was jump-starting. Gary already did the work for the visas. You just need to do the paperwork for the actual adoption. Susan grabbed a hold of Ellen's hands. It had been so long since Ellen had contact with anyone but her husband. She was afraid Susan can see right through her, like she knew of all the trouble she had been through in the past year. But the softness of Susan's hands soothed her. It reminded her of the power of a mother's touch. I know it ain't the same as rearing your own flesh and blood, Susan said, looking square into Ellen's eyes, but this is the Lord's work. It was as if God himself had offered his hands down to Ellen. Yes, this was a gift, no doubt about it. Ellen nodded. Susan jerked her into a hug. I knew I could count on you. A smile slowly slid onto Ellen's face. The clouds were clearing. What do I need to know before I take her in, though? Ellen asked. Does she have any medical conditions? What about her eating and sleeping habits? Is she potty trained already? Oh, I didn't even ask, but what's her name? Susan laughed at Ellen's eagerness. It's Ruby Lynn. Ruby Lynn? Surely that's her American name, not her real one. That's a Southern as sweet tea. I know, right? But it's written right on her birth certificate. Oh, and don't stress about trying to learn Filipino or anything. She knows enough English to get around. Ellen looked at the girls. They had settled on a show, Care Bears, and were singing the credit song in their squeaky voices. Their giggles and squeals made Ellen's heart flutter. It was what she had dreamed of. Susan placed a hand on Ellen's shoulder. Don't worry your pretty little head about anything else. Just let your motherly instincts take over and you'll be right as rain. Thank you all so much.